Hello, everyone. Welcome to the University of the Underground. We are a free, pluralistic, and transnational university and charity founded in 2017. I am Naum, and I am supporting this program that is called I Want to Believe, to investigate religion and belief systems in intersection with politics, economic, society, and nation states. I would like to welcome our researchers, and to any visiting participants or anyone else watching this video, I kindly ask for your support and make a donation to the university through our website. And today we're going to have a 40-minute talk followed by a 15-minute Q&A with our special lecturer of the day, who is Ibrahim Nehme. Ibrahim is a curator and speaker, currently based in Beirut and working on new media. His work is a cross-pollination between journalism, activism, and artistic expression, and it could be understood as a series of attempts to shift the collective consciousness. Through his work, Ibrahim is investigating underground culture and the ways it can submerge the popular cultural discourse. He's interested in activating transnational, cross-border forms of thinking that can give birth to new systems of politics and economics. He founded the Outpost magazine, and currently he's working on a podcast as well as a live performance for stage. So very intrigued to know what you will lecture to us today, Ibrahim. So all yours.
Thank you, Neo. It's hello everyone. I'm really glad to be here today. It's my second lecture at the University of the Underground. I did one last year as part of the club culture cohort, and it was very, very enriching in many ways. Also, I feel in many ways it's also connected to, like, very broadly to like the general scope of this program, because for me, like going to the club was like going to a church, which hasn't been the case, like, you know, after COVID. But today I'm going to talk about, first of all, I'm in Beirut in Lebanon at the moment. And as you probably know, like 400 kilometers to the south across the border, there's a genocide taking place. And there seems to be a concentrated effort to ethnically cleanse the Palestinian people by the apartheid state of Israel. And given the circumstances and the developments in the past 2 weeks, I felt the need to refocus this talk a little bit, to shed light, to use this platform also to shed light on the Palestinian liberation and resistance movement, but also to situate it within the broad theme of this cohort on religion and belief systems. So I'm gonna share my screen. Here. Can you see?
Yes, all good.
Okay, cool. So this is, so the starting point for my talk is actually this book, which I found at my parents' place when I was visiting a couple of months ago. And the title is The History of the Christian Church. And it was translated from Russian to Arabic by a bishop called Alexandros, who was the great bishop of Aleppo in the 50s and the 60s. And he's actually my father's great uncle. And I grew up hearing all kinds of stories about this man. And even in the late 90s, before my grandma passed away, she was related to him. I went with her and my dad and her cousin, and we made the pilgrimage to the church he built in Aleppo, which is called the Bishara Church, where he is actually buried, or he was buried. And like you hear stories about like the funeral and how like Aleppo was shut down for his funeral and how he was respected, and like they tell you stories about this man. But for me, the most crazy story is he was studying theology in Russia in 1916 and 1917, and like around that time. And in 1917, at the outbreak of the Russian Revolution and the crackdown that happened on the churches, he was forced to flee Russia, and he had to make the trip back home to Lebanon on foot. And it took him, with his colleague, like they traveled together, and it took them 6 months to reach. And I was always fascinated by this story. And these kinds of stories travel down from generation to generation, and like you can't really vouch for the accuracy of the story, but like just the very idea of it captured my imagination for a long time. And then I found this book, and I started reading. And for someone who is as Naomi was saying, very much interested in the nature of movements of change, and how movements of change form, and how they grow and how they spread, and the politics and the possibilities of these movements. This book intrigued me. But before I delve into the book, I'm just going to situate a bit, the geography of this place and the politics of this place where I come from, and like broadly the region that I belong to. So when we're going to call him Mutran Jaha, as he is affectionately called in my family. So when Mutran Jaha fled Russia, that was the geopolitical environment of this place. So you had this large entity called Greater Syria, which at the time belonged to the Ottoman Empire. So you had like different sub-states, which now are basically modern day Lebanon, modern day Syria, modern day Palestine, modern day Jordan and Iraq. And within this region, there were different states that belonged to the rule of the Ottoman Empire. But then a year later, after he came back to Lebanon, the Ottoman Empire fell after the end of the First World War, and then the British and the French came in, and they divided what used to be, or what used to belong to the Ottomans among them. So this whole region, Greater Syria, got divided into sub-states, and that's how, for example, Lebanon was created, and Palestine and Jordan were created. And then the spheres of influence were divided among the British and the French. So the French took what used to be the state of Damascus, Aleppo, and Beirut, and the Latakia. And then the British took the Iraq and Palestine. So now what's interesting is that after that happened, the British had made and this basically, this kind of arrangement is referred to as the Sykes-Picot agreement, because it was named after the British general Mark Sykes and the French diplomat Georges Picot, who kind of basically sat together and drew up some lines, and divided the land, and created like these countries out of it, and divided people who for so long have lived with one another and married each other, and shared so much culture and heritage and tradition and history among each other. For example, I have a friend from Lebanon whose grandfather was married to a woman from Iraq, and he used to drive a taxi from Lebanon to Iraq. And they used to also like go to Haifa and Palestine to visit relatives. Now people in Lebanon and Syria, they can't even imagine crossing the border and going to Haifa or to Palestine because it's close. So suddenly you had this setup where people who have shared so much together and were connected by this breadth and history of the land, were suddenly divided, mostly along like also religious fault lines. So now in Palestine, as the division were made, the British who were controlling the territory had made promises to the Zionist organization to found a Jewish state in Palestine. And there is this famous, now in the past week, it was really circulated on social media. It's called the Belford Declaration, which was basically referring to Britain's foreign secretary, forgot his first name, but Balfour, where he sent this letter to the Lord Rothschild, who was a very prominent Jewish person in Britain. And it says, His Majesty's government view with favor the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people, and will use their best endeavors to facilitate the achievement of this object, it being clearly understood that nothing shall be done which can prejudice the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine, or the rights and political status enjoyed by Jews in any other country. So that was in 1917. Again, like so much happened in 1917. And then basically the Jews like started immigrating to found their homeland in Palestine, and this is one of the first maps of Jewish settlements in Palestine. I don't have also it was circulated on social media. It shows like this, like there are several maps showing the expansion of Jewish settlements over the past 70 years. But basically, this goes to show how you had this massive land that like shared so much, and then the politics of the day kind of created a system of division and conflict, using religion in particular to kind of instigate people against each other and to create chaos to achieve like different political objectives. So back to the book. For me, what's interesting about the book also in the context of this talk is that it originates from this supercharged region or supercharged place that is now witnessing like unimaginable violence, and it goes on. First, it kind of like it makes clear that the history of the Christian Church is actually the history of the people who believed in the Christian faith, who carried it and who transmitted it. And it's not the history of the faith itself, because it stipulates that the the Christian faith is something divine and eternal, and this does not change. So is not part of the history of the book or the history of the church, unless people disagree about how they interpret the faith. And I'm really like, I'm not using the book to talk about the Christian faith or the history of the Christian church. What interests me about the book is actually how this faith spread, and how for someone who is very interested in the nature of movements, I look at Christianity as a movement that started in this region, and then it kind of evolved into this massive, idea or ideology that many people subscribe to around the world. So in observing that history, there are two basically, or we can observe this history from two facets. The first is an internal facet, which means how that faith was protected, how it was clarified, And you know, also like it taps into the heresies and the divisions that happened as a result of the different interpretations of the faith along the way. So in that case, it's about like this internal examination of the faith. Faith is very much about how you uphold, you safeguard, and you protect an idea or an ideology, and then or a message in that case. And then there is the external facet, which I'm particularly interested in, because then it's about how this message is disseminated and all the messengers that kind of come in to disseminate this idea far and wide. And here it's the book starts with the 12 disciples of the Christ, but also the 7 students who were also around him that helped seed the Christianity when it first started. And so here the external elements are very much, for me at least, and how I observed from reading the book, is about, you know, the dissemination of the message. So I feel, and the tools and the tactics, you know, that are used to kind of spread and plant this message. And here for me, it's also interesting to then look at the Zionist movement and any other movement really from that regard. Like, what are the internal factors that are helping in kind of upholding the message of this movement, and like what brings it internally, kind of what grounds the movement, and then what helps it expand. So in that regard, I feel that the Zionist movement, because of so many different factors, but also because of its, you know, having a very strong lobby in the United States, and also because of the changing political circumstances in Europe, and also like in Russia, with the Russian Revolution that we spoke about, I feel helped you know, prepare and ripen the circumstances for the Zionists to eventually not only establish a Jewish homeland for themselves in Palestine, but also for a period of 70 years to kind of create all manner of atrocities without being checked. And that goes to show like the power of the external factor and the power of media in this regard. Like who controls the narrative, who controls the media, controls the message at the end of the day. And I feel that what happened the past week in the Palestinian liberation and resistance movement is that finally those mediums of production or tools to, you know, that help the Zionists own the message have begun to crack. And that, for me, that is really the breakthrough from what has been happening in the past 2 weeks. But also, just to also talk a little bit about, you know, like, because I feel there's so much that could be said about, you know, like the struggle from a religious point of view, you know, like the Jews and the Arabs and like also the other minorities that exist. But I'm going to take the Lebanese example as a case. And after the foundation of Lebanon, after Lebanon gained independence from French rule in 1946, basically all the parties agreed that they would adopt something called the confessionalism, which is basically a system of governance that divides political power among religious and ethnic groups depending on their size in the land that they share. And initially, that system was thought to kind of, you know, create equilibrium between the different religious factions. In Lebanon, there are 18 different religious sects, by the way. So, but this now, like many years later, it proved to be the complete opposite, because then the 15-year war was waged, and was waged with these, you know, religiously or along these religiously charged lines, and created this rift in the country where the country itself has become divided among religious lines. So I'm interested in, the other movements that have been or that are now trying to kind of gather energy and momentum to counter, this wave of division, mostly through religion. So in 1964, actually also which was the year that this book was published. The Arab Nationalism, which is a movement or this ideology which was championed by the Egyptian president at the time, Jamal Abdel Nasser, and which called for the unity among Arab people and the creation of a political union that brings together all the Arab states. So, yeah, when the book was published in 1964, the idea of Arab nationalism was at its height, and I feel what really helped propagate it was a radio that was broadcast from Cairo and that had outposts in different parts of the Arab region, and it was called Sawt al-Arab, which means the voice, the Arab voice, or the voice of the Arabs, which reached 50 million people. It received 300 letters per day. It broadcasted at 500,000 watts, 24 hours a day. It crossed border after border and kind of united people against colonialism and imperialism. And for some time, it really helped perpetuate this idea that Arab people are somehow bound together by not only geography but like tradition, culture, and religion. And that there's a strong premise for the creation of this nationalistic ideology. But then a few years later, Egypt and Syria waged a war against Israel. It's called the 6-Day War. It only lasted for 6 days, and the Arabs suffered a major defeat. And it was a turning point in the Arabs, in the Arabs' war against the Israelis, because then that defeat somehow tainted all the years to come up to our day now. Because then Israel somehow gained the upper power and it cemented its total control over the Palestinian territory, or over Palestine, sorry. And reason I'm bringing this up and I'm like really stressing on the external factor is because I want to tie it a little bit to my work and then situate it within like the ongoing struggle. So when I first heard the story of Sawt al-Arab, I was this radio I told you about, I was so fascinated by how the single entity can, which is a radio, can become this unifying space that almost hypnotizes people, especially when they used to bring Kulthum, like this legendary Egyptian singer. They used to put her to sing just before the Abdel Nasser, the president, would give his speech, just to like, it was a way of like hypnotizing people and kind of like, raising the nationalistic tone just before the speech. So yeah, I was very fascinated by this radio, and at the time, like I was publishing a magazine between 2012 and 2016, and the magazine was called the Outpost, and it was very much like a space to produce a new narrative about this part of the world, because I felt that for the longest time our story was being told by other people And I felt that we need to take ownership of our narrative and of the media that spreads this narrative. So this was like a really humble attempt to kind of, strike in that regard. So for one of our cover stories, we decided to explore this idea of, what if we can create a media entity, in this particular case, a radio, that can produce this narrative that can expand in such a way that it would affect the collective consciousness and eventually maybe shift it. So what we did is we invented a radio station and we called it Midan, and Midan is basically this, the square, like Midan Tahrir, where the revolution happened, where the Arab Spring took hold in Egypt. And then what we did, like we really kind of built up the universe of the radio. So we commissioned the designer, Muthanna Hussein, to design the logo. He did the logo guidelines, he did the poster. We really built it up. And then the story, we published the story in the form of an interview between the Outpost and the programming director of the station, who started telling us about all the kinds of programming they do, but also what kind of social change and social impact is happening as a result of the programming that is being broadcast through this station. And then we published this manifesto. I'm gonna read like parts of it. It was written by Rafael Khouri. Because of every fucking Arab dictator, because of their fucking sons, because of the fucking rich people who are in bed with them, because of the cheapening of Arab music in those fucking videos, because of every fucking corrupt minister lining his pocket at our expense, because of fucking hypocrisy when it comes to Palestine, because of barrel fucking bombs falling from the sky, because of the people fucking starving in Syria, because of fucking honor crime and the cult of fucking virginity, because of fucking censorship, because our fucking noses aren't fucking pointy enough, because of backwards road turning, child beating, or elitist education systems, because of children's books that insult anyone's fucking intelligence, because of the fucking sexual harassment a woman faces every time she goes out, because her fucking brother can do whatever he fucking pleases, because fuck the violence of the police and army for killing, raping, and torturing their own citizens, because our parents are named after their eldest fucking son, because of fucking neo-colonialism, because women can't pass on their nationality to their kids, because of sexist discrimination at work, because of fucking nepotism, because of unqualified people getting jobs and keeping them, because of fucking unemployment, because fuck sham elections, because fucking fundamentalists, okay, and it goes on and goes on. And then because of the fucking wall in Palestine, because of 1948, which was the year of the first Intifada, because of the year that Israel was created, because of the first and the second Intifada, because of the Yarmouk camp, because of fucking Zionism, because of everyone. Okay, so it goes on, and sorry for all the curse words in a row, but I feel that was like really powerful in the sense that it kind of captured the energy of this fictional movement, and it planted it on the pages of the magazine. And what followed was like this incredible response from people, many of whom thought that this radio was real. And there were several attempts to actually make it real, and then they didn't pick up until I was invited to curate a space in Beirut. It's called Mansion, and a mansion is this like artist squat, like an old building which was turned into an artist squat, and so I was curating the space for 6 months, and then I proposed this idea of developing or creating a community radio that can become a mouthpiece, for us, this group of artists and writers and activists who have gathered together in this space to tell our story authentically and like really to claim ownership of our story. So this is mentioned. And then what followed was like really several weeks of kind of bringing together mansion residents in like different ways to kind of record their stories, Mansion resident, but also like the wider community. We ended up working with like domestic workers, with kids who are in prison, with like the LGBT community. We actually, one of our interventions with the LGBT community on Pride Week in Beirut was raided by the general security, and we kind of had to stop the activity. So yeah, like different kinds of intervention. So that was in 2017. And then, sorry, in 18. And then in 2020, when COVID happened, and after I had left the space, and after the project had ended, so we did the website and we published all the material on the website, but the project like really stopped there. So after I left and then COVID hit, a group of residents at Mansion decided to start a radio again, and they called it Radio El Hay. And then there was something so fascinating about the story, because a week after Radio El Hay started in Mansion, maybe 2 weeks after the first lockdown, 5 or 6 other radios in different parts of the region and like their diasporic groups emerged, inspired by the story of Radio El Hay in Mansion. One of them is Radio El Hara in Palestine. And the thing about Radio El Hara is that they somehow, because they're 5 people and like each one of them is embedded within different subgroups and sub-communities within the Middle East or the Arab world, they somehow managed to populate their grid with a lot of programs from like the get-go. So this was maybe a week after like they launched, and this was maybe like 3 weeks after they launched. And they also had this like really striking visual identity, which helped disseminate it, and it's really spread like wildfire, to the point that they had like 20,000 followers after like maybe a few months from launching. And it became so powerful that when last July Israel decided to annex Jerusalem, they did a 3-day sonic protest where they dedicated the entire programming as against the annexation, and they brought like they had like this huge lineup. So yeah, I'm just gonna, don't have much more time. And yeah, I remember I was walking down by the sea in Beirut, and I was listening to the to the sonic protest, and Nicholas Jar was broadcasting his segment, and he was talking about like the body of water that connects us all. And I just felt it was just a very, very powerful moment, because I felt like super connected to everyone who was listening. And I felt the struggle was real, and the struggle was, we're all connected to the struggle, and we were using our energies and our all that we can to kind of protest injustice and the apartheid in Israel. So after 2 weeks after the so 2 weeks after the craziness started in Palestine, and with the ethnic cleansing of the Israelis and like the storming of the Al-Aqsa Mosque, the Radio El Hara decided to stop, to do like a silent protest. So they stopped broadcasting content, and then they launched the Sonic Liberation Front a few days after that, which is like the umbrella to kind of bring together all artists who wanted to protest what's going on through their sound and music. And this is something that Nicholas Jar, who's a contributor to the station or to the radio, said, which really struck me. The asymmetric relationship between those who give orders and those who must obey is always demonstrated by who controls access to the soundscape. And I feel what happened in the past few weeks was actually kind of the Palestinian movement and everyone who supports it kind of creating a dent in that soundscape and beginning the journey to own and to create their own, to a point where I feel we'll start creating a balance eventually and gradually in the narrative, and eventually shift the public opinion, which we have already started to see, towards justice and towards the right side of history. So for me, what's interesting about all this, and given the context of your program, is essentially how movements become movements in this way, but also specifically because of those external factors that help them in owning the soundscape in such a way that captures their internal idea and ideology and transmit it in a way that captures the imagination of people and shift the collective consciousness. And I feel this is, if we were to look at the history of Christianity, this is very much, I feel this applies to all sorts of movements and religions in particular. I think, yeah, my time is almost up. So, yeah, thank you for listening.
Thank you, Ibrahim.
Oh, finally.
Hello. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good. Good to see you here.
Thank you so much for your lecture.
Yeah, of course. Always a pleasure.
Listening. Thank you. Good to see you.
Yeah, good to hear you.
Naum? Is Naum here? Hola, Naum.
I mean, before he responds, I have a question. And yes, so thank you so much for the talk, and I really appreciate and I'm grateful for you shifting it to the current context. And I kind of wonder, yeah, like how, what is it, like, how does your work currently, like, I really loved this this project space, or can I call it the project space, that or was it that you were running, that you showed us a few?
Yeah, the artist space.
Yeah, I kind of, even in this context of this program, we are not together, and COVID has made that the case, and like reflecting on on physical artistic spaces and how change and ideas can work in that space. And how do you find it right now in this moment, where we are kind of on the moment of like breaking into physical world but still working digitally, having the power of the digital? I also, like you said, that you were fascinated by this idea of a radio station, like crossing border after border after border. And like, I'm from Slovakia, and so post-Soviet Union, and there was also radio, like the free Europe, or liberated Europe was actually the force of liberation, how information was spreading. And basically, sorry, I'm kind of going like that, but yeah, I'm wondering about how your work and work of your collaborators in this very moment is being held by technology. I mean, I saw quite a few Instagram IGTVs also by Palestinian youth and these kind of organizations, and how that is impacting. And so maybe, like, I would just maybe like to hear a little bit more about your thoughts on that, and perhaps also what is the most useful to be taken forward by people who like us, in that are in, or me, that is intrigued, I want to help, but or spread awareness, and what are the best ways to share that, share the knowledge, share the information, and what is the best information to be shared?
Yeah, thank you for that. I'm gonna start with the end. I think, I wanted to actually compile a list of resources and share it with you, but I didn't have the time before the talk. So I'm gonna do it and then I'll send it to you guys, because I think it's important. Also, a few days ago, you started seeing major art organization and major culture organization making statements on their Instagram and Facebook pages saying that they stand with justice and they stand with equality. And I feel that this could not have happened not even 5 years ago. And I feel a lot of the resources, is basically indexing who is in, who is for and who is against, and in a way, just to kind of create a landscape of, the cultural sphere and where does it, sway in this regard. And I think this is crucial. Because a lot of art organizations and cultural institutions say that they support equal rights and LGBT movements and Black lives movements, and when it comes to the Palestinian struggle, they stay silent. And I feel there's a lot of, obviously, there's a lot of deep-rooted histories and connections that prevent them from, because of their donors and funding schemes, which in some ways prevent them from going all out in full support. So I feel a lot of the resources I'm interested in, at least, is kind of mapping out what's happening in that space, because I really believe that boycotting, when you are facing an entity that just last week received 700 million, or I actually forgot billion or million, it doesn't matter at this point, of US money to buy weapons, of US weaponry. And then at this point, the tactics to kind of stand against this draconian war machinery is, among other things, but very importantly, boycotting. When you start boycotting the enemy's products and all the institutions that are associated with it, especially those that are funding the Israeli settlers. So I think, I'll compile a list of that and I will share with you. But also going back to the medium, I feel 10 years ago, when the Arab Spring happened, at the turn of the decade, many people were calling it the Facebook revolution and the Twitter revolution. And if you remember, the iPhone came out in 2007, the Facebooks of the world, and it was still very new, the adoption of social media, and then 10 years later, I think what kind of shift the scales in our favor is the fact that the use of social media became super prominent, and this is really what helped tip the scales. But then again, it's still 10 years. It's just been a decade, of social media adoption and use. So I can't even imagine what kind of tools are gonna come, or what new inventions will come to support our movement for justice and equality. But personally, even though I know that the world is shifting dramatically to the online space, and in many ways it's a very good thing, but I still crave physical, physical encounters. For example, I used to print a print magazine. I love, that physical experience of holding something tangible, but also, as one of my projects, I opened a cafe for 2 weeks and I invited the city in, and the interactions produced media from that, cafe space. So I feel there's something really powerful about a physical experience. And I feel after COVID, after having been more than a year in lockdown, I feel there's even more craving for that. So what I'm doing now, because you asked me about my work, I'm actually working on a game that kind of brings people together, because I feel there is this need to connect with one another, but also there is this need to practice joy, hence it being a game. And I'm very interested also, I'm very interested in joy as a political, as a tool to resist oppressive regimes who are in their very nature, like they're the antithesis of joy. So I don't know if I'm like answering you. I feel I'm like turning around a lot, but yeah, I'll definitely compile something and I'll share it with you.
No, it was a perfect response to my turmoil. So thank you very much.
Cool.
Great. There's a question by Eden.
Hi.
Hey.
Thank you so much for your presentation. I have a question about this online activism. Actually, my driving point was about Palestine, but maybe we can think about the whole situation in the Middle East and specifically Levant. So we had two intifadas, right? Two civil disobedience events. And then I actually did my fieldwork in Palestine in a theater about cultural resistance. And now I'm, yes, the Freedom Theater in Jenin. So I'm researching on cultural resistance. And so if you know the Freedom Theater, probably you know its founder, Giuliano Merhamis, was saying that the third intifada is going to be an electronic and artistic intifada, cultural intifada. But of course, he wasn't able to see anything because he was killed in 2011. So I was wondering, because many things you speak about actually touch this, I think, this cultural intifada notion. So I was wondering your thoughts about this, because how can we conceptualize this term? And how can we show international solidarity in a non-violent way? And what can we do artistically or culturally to contribute to this?
This is a very good question. I strongly believe that political change begins in culture. It's actually the culture that changes politics and not the other way around. And if you look at all movements around the world, be it the the abolishment movement, the anti-slavery movement, or the civil rights movement, or the LGBTQ plus movement, or the feminist movement, all of these movements began in ideas, began in culture, in artists and activists taking up to different media to plant a new way of thinking about a certain group or certain ideas. And I feel that before the laws change, the cultural imagination or the public imagination.
¿Viste lo que le puse? ¿Te lo esperabas? No.
So yeah, before the laws change, or what allows for the laws to be changed, the culture needs to be ready. So before the gays were allowed, like before the laws changed that allowed the gays to get married, the culture needed to be ready to embrace such a shift in behavior, in society. So I think culture is super integral, because it's the artists who plant the seeds and show us new ways of being, new ways of living, new ways of sharing the same space with each other. So in that way, I do feel that it's super important to frame it as a cultural intifada. And I think had Giuliano been living to this day, he would be like rejoicing in what's happened. And I think this is it. It's like the electronic culture intifada, electronic because it has the power of allowing people to control the medium of production of the narrative and disseminating it. And it's very much cultural because look at the memes that are being produced to spread the ideas that were, disseminated in the past weeks, and now look at like the cultural institutions that are suddenly like breaking their silence and joining the movement. And eventually, when the culture creates such puts so much pressure, like for example, if so many people start boycotting the Israeli cultural institutions and cultural production, which will have severe economic impact on the Israeli state, then we'll like really start seeing massive shifts. But it's, of course, I strongly believe that it's the culture that will lead the way.
Thank you so much. Can you also share us the link of the statement that you shared with us, the one in purple background?
The manifesto, yeah, of course.
Yeah, thank you.
I can, you know what, I will share the whole PDF of the whole story.
Okay, thank you so much. Shukran kitir.
Of course.
Great. Chloe.
Hi, thank you for the talk. I have kind of a bit more of a practical question about radio. I wanted to ask whether you have any preference with like radio stations that are like online, or radio stations that are with like radio waves, analog radio, because I think there's a lot written and said about analog radio and its political use because of like it reaches certain areas and it could go over borders and this kind of stuff. And obviously digital radio can do that too, but it's less like a specific area, I guess. I just wondered whether you thought about these questions when you were forming your radio station.
Oh yeah, big time. Big time, because I'm also interested in, disrupting. I mean, at the end of the day, I'm a media producer, and I'm interested in disrupting the media I use. Like, for example, for me, opening a cafe for 2 weeks and inviting the city in to kind of exchange coffee. Like they would have coffee, but instead of paying for it, they would share a story. This was also a form of, kind of disrupting a form of media and trying new ways to create content. In Lebanon, for example, I would say that trying to create massive shift through digital radio is still very ambitious, because we're still going to talk to the same people in our circle, where people get stuck in traffic for so much time and all they do is listen to the radio. So I feel there's so much potential in penetrating that space. But there's also potential in exploring what else radio can be. Like, can it go to communities that don't even have access to like neither a car nor like internet access to go on a digital radio, or even if they have internet access, it's too slow to even access that space. Like, can we take the entire radio unit and travel with it to these communities that don't have access to, these platforms? And what kind of impact can happen in those spaces? I'm really interested in also the physical encounter. Like if we're hosting a conversation on stage, if we're hosting a DJ on stage, they're essentially producing content, they're essentially developing a sound. But what if it's being shared with people who are in the same space? Does this, like, where does the boundaries between theater and radio stop in this case? Like, what if it's being recorded and transmitted at the same time? So I feel, there are a lot of interesting questions in that space.
Thank you.
Of course.
Thank you. Anyone else? David.
Yes, I'm working right now in like a comic in like illustration story. If in the resources that we'll find, if there is any particular cartoonist or comic books or that sort of images that to understand better the situation that we could look at, that would be very helpful as well. I don't know if you would recommend anything in particular.
I'm definitely, I just shared on the chat Samandal, which is a comic magazine, like a magazine of comics that produced here in Beirut. check them out. And they've been also doing some stuff. Like the editor shared something about Palestine the past week. But I will also definitely include, links in the thing in the document I will prepare.
Thank you so much.
Of course.
Thank you. So, Ibrahim, if any of the researchers would like to get in touch with you, what would be the best way to do it?
I'm gonna put my email here.
That's great. Fantastic. So, well, I think we can wrap up the session. And once again, yeah, thanks so much, Ibrahim. Like this lecture came in a very crucial moment, right? When we are seeing, as we speak, a lot of action and a lot of fight and a lot of resistance. So thank you for sharing these ideas and your work with us. And
thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.
Thank you, and hope to see you again soon in the university.
Of course. And I will definitely share the document with you guys.
Please send it to us, and we'll forward it to everyone.
Perfect. All right. Ciao, guys. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.